left to his own devices, Rishi Sunak can win us the next election. Unfortunately, he's not being left to his own devices. We have got some parliamentary colleagues and others who are just messing it up for us. If they continue like that, then it might not be such a great outcome. If they can be persuaded to just go quietly into that still night, then all bets are off. We could easily come home ahead.
This is the exit interviews. As dozens of MPs announced they're quitting, I asked them why they're leaving us. This week, it's Sir Gary Streeter, the Conservative MP. Born in 1955, grew up in Devon, training as a solicitor before being elected to Plymouth City Council for the SDP. He later defected to the Conservatives in 1988. He was elected as MP in South West Devon in 1992. Served as a junior minister and PPS to John Major. He was one of just 165 Tory MPs to survive the 1997 New Labour landslide. Served in the shadow cabinet of William Hague, was sent to the back benches by Ian Duncan Smith, where he's toiled quietly for the past 2 decades. So, Sir Gary Streeter, welcome to your exit interview.
Thank you very much.
It's a chance for both of us to learn what you could have done better during your time with us. I suppose we should start with the obvious question: why are you leaving?
Well, as you can probably see, I am of a certain age, so I'll be 69 at the next election. And as you've just so eloquently told your viewers, I was elected first in 1992, so it'll be 32 years at Westminster. I think that's a good shift, and I'm ready to make way for a younger person.
There can be lots of ways that people get into this job. How did you get into politics?
Yeah, it's an unusual story in the sense that I wasn't interested in politics at all at university or as a younger man. But I think you probably know I'm a committed Christian, and at the age of 30, I just had this sense of a calling to public service. And the way that I sort of pursued that, it developed into an opportunity to take part in politics. And so I actually did get involved and did join the SDP again, as you've pointed out. Thanks for that. Because I didn't know anything about politics. I knew Mrs. Thatcher was the Prime Minister, David Owen was a good local member of Parliament. I joined his party, and that's how it started.
So it was a calling from God?
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did that, because when you were younger, you weren't even that religious. You sort of went through, as you got a bit older, was it you got into religion through your wife?
Well, I mean, you obviously not so well up on theological jargon, Matt,
Yeah.
but as a young man, I was brought up in a non-Christian household.
Yeah.
But at the age of 23, 24, when I married Jan, she was a Christian, I was not. And during that process of the first 6-12 months of married life, I started to explore Christianity for myself and came to the conclusion that the evidence for the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is overwhelming. So I made my decision. So it wasn't a gradual thing.
Yeah.
There comes a day when you have to look at the evidence and make up your mind. And neither you or I expected me to be telling this story on this programme.
No, but it's an interesting question. We'll talk about your career in a moment. In terms of being a Christian in politics, has it affected your work? And how, because we've seen it even quite recently with the Kate Forbes in Scotland, her faith suddenly became a very big part of it. Have you felt it's been able to inform or shape your politics? Have you had to play it down in your politics?
No, I think the key thing about modern day politics is authenticity. And it's just telling people, well, this is who I am. If you like it, vote for it. If you don't, don't vote for it, vote for somebody else. So I'm only involved in politics because I do have a sense of calling. If I wasn't a Christian, I wouldn't be involved in politics. I can assure you, I stayed as a lawyer, made an awful lot more money, and probably had a much quieter life.
Do you think because it was through your wife Jan that you found God and that led into politics, has that meant that she's never been able to complain about your work? Because it's your fault. If it wasn't for her and your Christianity, you'd never have got into it.
I've never used that line with her. I don't know if you're a married man, Matt, but that
I am.
That might not work too well.
I can feel it might not work brilliantly well.
Well, the reality is, of course, especially when you represent a seat 4 hours from London, there's enormous sacrifice involved in suddenly one of you jetting off to London, particularly in the early days before the internet and smartphones, being away all week, off on a Sunday night, often come back on a Friday, 2 young children. So there's a real sacrifice involved. And in fact, to be fair to my wife, she would constantly tell me that she was prepared to make that sacrifice if she felt I was doing the right thing and serving the country. And I hope that I have done that.
Has there ever been a moment where your faith and your politics or your commitment to your commitment as a Conservative MP have been in tension, that you've had to sort of pick party loyalty, towing the party line, and your faith?
Yeah, I would say there have been several times along the journey when that has been the reality. It's just reality for most people, whether they have a faith or not. It's constituency versus party, it's conscience versus party, and so on. Of course, there are a lot of things which are free votes, and so that's a sort of get out of jail card. But we made the decision, my wife and I, in the early days, I would put my conscience first, my constituency second, and party third. And the upshot of that, after 32 years, believe it or not, is that I have only voted against my own party 9 times in 32 years. And as I was sharing this in the tea room one day, David said, that just shows what a supine character you must be. He, of course, does that a week.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'd think there was nothing to, apart from, of course, when he was a whip, when he would have frowned on
different story then.
On that sort of thing. All right, let's go. You've had several bosses. You've got 30 odd years in politics. You've had several bosses. Well, we go through them. I'll give you the name of one of your bosses in politics, and you just sum them up in a word or two.
Gosh.
So let's start with David Owen.
Good, worthy, good man.
And you started out in the SDP. You decided you wanted to get into politics. He was obviously local MP there as well.
Yeah.
What was it that made you turn your back on the SDP in the 80s?
Well, because I came to politics in this very unusual way, with no sort of hinterland and no thinking about it at university. I bet you were reading Hansard at the age of 14, weren't you, under your blankets? I bet you were. But I started thinking about politics almost the day I joined the SDP. When I started thinking about what do I really think about enterprise and business and Europe and grammar schools and all the rest of it, I am just a natural Tory. And so after sort of 12 months or so of grappling with all this, I made that decision, crossed the floor of the chamber. That was a difficult time.
In Plymouth City Council.
Yeah, and because you let down all these people who've been campaigning for you against the Conservative Party, of course. And that was a tough old gig. But it had to be done. I was simply on the wrong vehicle, and I had to change course.
Did it make any difference that the Tories were riding high under Margaret Thatcher and the SDP appeared to be going in the opposite direction?
Well, when I made the switch, I'm not sure that was the case. Actually, in 1988, I don't think the Tories were riding very... I suppose we just won the 87 election.
Yeah. So good and worthy for David Owen. So then you jumped to the Conservatives. You become an MP in 1992. How do you sum up John Major?
I liked John Major very much, but I don't think he should ever have been Prime Minister or the leader of our party. I don't, there are 3 people, probably if I include Tony Blair, 4 people I've encountered in my 32 years at Westminster who I think are absolutely outstanding. They should have been leader and should have been Prime Minister. It's a very difficult job, and I'm not quite sure that John, bless his heart, he should certainly have been in the high-ranking cabinet positions. But he didn't quite have that personal security, I didn't feel, or vision to take the party forward.
So what should we put down for him? What word sums up John Major?
Agreeable.
That's very good. And you were his PPS. Explain to people who don't know what that means and what the job involved. It was obviously quite a difficult time for him.
Well, I was a minister in his government and in the Whip's office. Then when we lost in 97, as you rightly said, it was a bit of a landslide. I was asked by the then Chief Whip to become John Major's PPS, a parliamentary private secretary, bag carrier, personal assistant, really, to look after him. And he did need looking after because, he was badly beaten up by his own backbenchers, cabinet ministers, actually. And one of the funny things was I would sit in his office. First of all, I had to find him a great office in the Westminster, and he had a wonderful office overlooking the Thames and so on. And then all these people who'd spent 12 months, 2 years stabbing him in the back would come in and say, "Oh, John, I do feel," and they'd lost their seats. "I can serve the party in a wider capacity," which was code for saying, "Please put me in the House of Lords." And he'd be pleasant and so on. And they would walk out and I'd show them out the door and I'd come back to his desk and he'd say the same thing every time, "Over my dead body."
So was this the period when he was, when the party was choosing a new leader?
Yes, it was about 3-4 months.
Yeah. Did you... Because he has this, I suppose for a lot of people, he has this sort of caricature of the spitting image, tucking his pants into his shirt into his pants and all of that.
Don't we all do that?
Was there more to him than that?
Oh, of course there was. I mean, he's a very wise man, very clever man, very deep man, in many ways a very strong man. But, as I say, leading your nation, it's a tough gig.
But was it an impossible job by that point? To have won in 92... against lots of people's expectations. And given everything that unfolded, the party got hammered then in 1997. But do you think it's just that actually parties, after about a decade in power, that's probably what happens regardless of who's leader?
I can see where you might be taking me with this question. I think there is a shelf life, and there should be in a mature democracy. You've got to have a change of party from time to time. 18 years was too long. So it may have been
13, 14 years. Is that too long?
Well, you see, the current situation is that we've had so many different prime ministers that actually we can go to the country and say, well, no, we've already changed.
Yeah.
And actually, I think most people, by the time we get to the election, will realise that Rishi Sunak is very special, and might well deserve a longer run at it.
We'll come to him in a moment. Let's carry on working them through. So William Hague then obviously becomes leader in opposition. You became his shadow international development secretary.
Yes.
William Hague in a word.
Brilliant.
Oh, very good.
He's one of my three people on our side who I think is absolutely outstanding. His intellect, his ability to communicate, his vision, his strength, quite fantastic.
But an impossible job in the late 90s, early noughties.
Yeah, because Tony Blair reigned supreme.
Yeah.
And he sort of, it was no one, the Archangel Gabriel wouldn't have beaten Tony Blair. How about me saying that?
Yeah. Your Labour opponent, the Labour's International Development Secretary, Claire Short, said you were a strange man. What did you think of her?
I liked Claire very much. She was very genuine. We came from a different sort of ideological viewpoint.
Yeah.
She got very angry at the dispatch box when any challenge, and the job, as you know, the shadow is to ask questions and probe, and why do we do this? And just the most gentle of questioning, and she suddenly became this raging tornado at the dispatch box. It was quite good fun to provoke her, actually. But I always knew that her heart was in the right place, and she did her absolute best for the most vulnerable people in the world.
OK, so William Hague was brilliant. Then, after the 2001 election, he's replaced by Ian Duncan Smith, who dispatches you to the back benches.
Yes, and the reason why he did that was because when Ian rang round, and the shadow cabinet at the time to say, will you support me? And I was supporting Michael Portillo. I made probably the rookie error, Matt, of saying to him, no, Ian, I won't support you because I believe you're unelectable.
Is that your words to sum up?
Those were exactly my words to him, and as a result of that...
For some reason, he didn't give you a job.
Quite, and that's fine. That's fine, because it was an absolute disaster of 2 years. And actually, he did give me some kind of job as vice chairman in charge of diversity or something like that. And I went round the country and I met fabulous groups of people doing all sorts of wonderful work, so that was okay.
Do you have any regrets about that?
No.
Well,
it didn't last long. And here's a little story for you. I'm one of the few Conservative MPs who've been to North Korea. And it was in North Korea in 2003. I was in Pyongyang when the leadership election took place for Ian Duncan Smith. And I was rung by one of Ian's acolytes saying, please, will you at least abstain and not vote against him in the leadership contest? I said, absolutely not. I'm voting against him. I've given my proxy to a colleague, a friend, and I've instructed him to vote against him. And so I'm probably the only person in 50 years to vote in Pyongyang.
Wow. But it didn't work, and you got elected.
No. This is in 2003 when you'd been there 2 years.
Oh yes,
this is getting rid of him.
It did work. So you did it. You ousted. You ousted a leader from North Korea. Very good. To be replaced by, so is unelectable your word for Michael for Ian Duncan Smith? I think it probably is. Michael Howard in a word.
Yes. Terrifying.
Terrifying.
I was his shadow when he was Shadow Foreign Secretary. I was Shadow Minister for Europe.
Yeah.
Never really understood any of the treaties we were negotiating. Absolutely, impossible to fathom even as a lawyer. Anyway, a very tough cookie to work for, but a brilliant mind.
So when was it? Anne Widdecombe said there was something of the night about him. Mm-hmm. Was she onto something?
No, I think that suggests sinisterness, and I don't see that. He absolutely speaks his mind. If he thinks you've done a bad job, he will tell you. I quite like that. At least you know where you are. But you know that when you walk into his room,
shouting and throwing things.
Not really shouting and throwing things. It's much more sort of what's the word? It was forensic.
Yeah.
It wasn't shouting. It wasn't Gordon Brown and hair dryers or whatever it was.
Yeah.
He was forensic.
Yeah.
And he'd just pull you apart and think, oh yeah, you're right. I've cocked that up completely.
Going through that whole period, and we'll come on to the recent chopping and changing of Tory leaders, but John Major, Ian Duncan Smith, he goes out halfway through, Michael Howard as well. Was there a point where you might have thought the Tory party just is never going to get its act together?
No, not really, because I think there was a lot of talent in the
Yeah.
wings. Look, in a democracy, you're in for a period, you're out for a period. There's always going to be a strong centre-right party in the UK. We were it, and I always felt we would recover. Just needed the right leadership. And while I was backing Michael Portillo when Duncan Smith got it, he was going to rebrand the party. He was a prototype David Cameron.
Yeah.
It needed to be done. Unfortunately, too many of the older members didn't recognise that.
Yeah, I know, the Tory party members going for the wrong person. There's a recurring theme.
Really?
Yeah,
I
it's weird.
hadn't noticed that.
Let's move on. David Cameron obviously then became leader in 2005,
Yeah.
beating David Davis.
Yeah.
David Cameron, in a word.
Well, I'm going to have to use three.
Go on.
A class act. I suppose I could say classy. But
Classy, we'll do that. Yeah.
But he was just a class
what
act.
is it that he had?
He had everything.
Yeah.
He had the brain, had the confidence, had the vision, and had the ability to communicate. I suppose you could say he's a bit posh. I don't actually think the British people care about that if you're good enough. I just think he had everything. And he should have been a great Prime Minister for a very long time until he made that interesting decision to resign after the Brexit result.
Was the mistake resigning at that point, or was the mistake promising the referendum in the first place, not knowing what he was doing?
I don't think we had any choice.
Okay.
I think the pressure from within the party and from to the right of the party was such that I don't think we could have governed if we hadn't given that.
How could he have been? Do you think he'd have done a better job at putting
things
things back together again in 2016 rather than handing over to Theresa May?
Most certainly. I think what he should have said was during the referendum debate, look, George Osborne's leading the debate for the pros staying in. Remain, that's the word.
Yeah.
Thank you. It seemed a long time ago now. Oh, it was. I'm going to stand behind it all. I'm not going to express an opinion. Whatever you choose, I will implement.
Yeah.
I wish he'd said that, because I think history would have been very different.
It's really interesting, that. And then you'd have had Michael go for one side, George Osborne on the other side, and he could have risen above him.
Yeah.
Instead, he did resign in 2016 to be replaced by Theresa May.
Yeah.
Theresa May, in a word.
I think she is very laudable. I think she's. I don't want to use the word worthy twice, and that's a bit cheap for her, because I think she's very good indeed. That's not one word. But she had impossible circumstances. I think she is. All right, here we go. High quality.
High quality.
That's two words. Well, hyphenate them.
Well, hyphenate.
You've got your dictionary there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. During all those Brexit shenanigans, you took a pop at one point at the swivel-eyed purists amongst your colleagues.
Who said that?
You did.
Well, I was misquoted.
Were you?
By you, probably. No. Yes, I did say that. Because I have, recognised, the day I walked into the House of Commons chamber for the first time, we were starting to discuss the Maastricht Treaty.
Yes.
And the reality was that those people who felt so passionately about the European issue, more important than anything else not just in politics, but in the world, you think, I'm sorry, that can't be right. You're just over-focused, swivel-eyed, just obsessed. And I'm afraid that these are the people who have taken us to the point of where we are today. And yeah, I think that they haven't done us a great service.
Do you think both, that's how we ended up with the referendum, but also what unfolded since, was that it was a worldview which just couldn't match reality?
Yeah, I think it's a worldview that doesn't match reality. And it's not that everyone who voted to leave is like that at all. No, not at all. But they were the kind of the kernel or the driving force behind it all. And without that obsession, I think we probably wouldn't have ended up where we are.
Well, let's move on. So obviously Theresa May didn't get it, lost a majority.
Yeah.
And then 2 years later...
But don't forget, when she started off as Prime Minister, she was incredibly popular.
Yeah.
And it was only the party manifesto halfway through the election campaign. We were ringing each other in the first half of the election campaign saying, this is unbelievable. It's never been this good.
Yeah.
And then the manifesto came out and then sort of, this is unbelievable. It's never been this bad.
Yeah. Was it all just because of the social care? The nothing has changed
It was
U-turn?
two or three things. Was there a granny tax? No, it was dementia tax.
Yeah.
Was that the same
yeah,
thing?
it was also with social care. Yeah. So she eventually went in 2019, having not been able to get anything through the House of Commons on Brexit, to be replaced by Boris Johnson.
Yes, I've heard of him.
Boris Johnson in a broadcastable word.
I'm going to have to use a couple of words
That's
again,
fine.
I'm afraid.
I'll fill it in on my clipboard.
Well, it's a phrase I've used several times.
Yeah.
Capable of greatness, but deeply flawed.
Let's be positive to start with.
Yeah.
What's he done that's been great?
Well, I suppose he delivered. First of all, he engineered an election He won an election with an 80% majority. Is pretty good, isn't it? And then he delivered a Brexit, so that's all good because that's what the British people had asked him to do. So that's impressive. Well, that's the positive bit.
Yeah. His flaws.
Well, obviously his lack of attention to detail, and I would say a recklessness as to the truth. That's sort of using a bit of legal speak. I think that's where he is. I may be telling the truth, I may not be. I just don't really care.
You talked about John Major being unsuited to the job. Is there anyone as unsuited to the job as Boris Johnson?
Well, he's unsuited in a different way because he had the intellectual capacity and I think and the personal security to do the job well if he'd been able to conquer his flaws, and but he couldn't.
Yeah. You, as we're preparing for the exit interview, I look back, you submitted an HR complaint against Boris Johnson right to the 1922 committee, saying you cannot reconcile the pain and the sacrifice of the vast majority of the British public during lockdown with the attitude and activity of those working in Downing Street. What did you think when you first heard about what had been going on in Number 10 while the rest of the country was in lockdown?
I think, if I'm honest with you, given what we were going through at the time, sick to my stomach. Because that 3 to 4 months of the first part of lockdown, I mean, I don't think any of us MPs have ever been busier, and it was just, you were constantly fielding questions from constituents. Can I do this? Can I do that? You know, can I go to Bristol to pick up my daughter at university? I've got, and we were just making all these decisions, and people were taking it so seriously, and it was like nothing anyone had ever experienced. And then when some of the stories started to emerge, well, hang on, in Downing Street it's been a bit more relaxed, and these are the rule makers. I just felt it was absolutely unacceptable.
It took quite a while for him to go, though. It was actually, the row over Chris Pinch and again, his recklessness with the truth, which meant he finally went. What does it tell you then that by the time you get to the post Liz, we'll come on to Liz Truss, but 100 of your colleagues wanted him to come back last year?
Yeah.
What did you make of that?
I found that astonishing. But, we're all elected to exercise our own judgment, and that's what they were doing. I didn't agree with them.
Have you ever prayed that he doesn't come back?
I don't think that's the sort of thing that I would ever pray about, because there's so much personal choice involved. You can't expect the creator of the universe to intervene in individual decisions of people who don't believe in him.
Do you think he will come back?
Absolutely not. I think it's completely spent force now. It's an absolute nonsense. I mean, he was never going to come back. And there's no appetite for him to come back. I should think the vast majority of the parliamentary party, are glad he's gone. We just want to move on. We think Rishi is very special. Let's give him 12 months of sort of noises off being silenced and let him show the people what he can do.
Okay, we'll come on to him in a minute. Let's deal with the short interlude that's known as Liz Truss. Liz Truss in a word?
Disastrous.
I mean, that is a word. Were you surprised? I mean, you were there when she arrived in the House of Commons. She was tipped as a star, junior minister, and so on. Were you surprised that she got the job, and then that she was so disastrous? In your word.
I didn't think she was a star. I think she was a very lovely person and very capable person, and certainly should have been in someone's cabinet. I was surprised when she ran for leader, and I couldn't really believe it when the party selected her. But on the other hand, Rishi didn't campaign terribly well at the start of the leadership campaign, the first leadership campaign. Well, there was only one, and I think he got off to a bit of a poor start. But it just wasn't a good moment.
I mean, given that you've been, 35, 40 years almost, you've been in and around the Conservative Party. Is it a problem that the Conservative Party members, and therefore the pressure they exert on MPs, seem to be so far from where the public are? In terms, the leadership election, the public clearly preferred Rishi Sunak to Liz Truss. The policies they pursued, the public are clearly there. A rump of members seem to want Boris Johnson back, despite the fact the public were very pleased when he quit as an MP last week. Is it a problem for the Conservative Party?
It doesn't help, but it's a problem that has been and can be contained. Because, many of my association are sort of fairly elderly and so on, and they have their certain views, but they will by and large, listen to the elected member and will take a lead from me. So it is a problem that the selectorate in many Conservative held seats are not necessarily representative of their own community. But it's something we can overcome with skillful management, and we have been overcoming it.
Do you think it was a mistake? And obviously you sort of understood why back in when William Hague was leader, and he changed the rules to give the members a say in the leadership. Was that a mistake? Should the leader be... Because there's a risk you end up with a leader imposed by the members who doesn't have the support of their
I think
MPs.
I would want to tweak it a bit and say that when it's a sitting Prime Minister that stood down and you're electing a new Prime Minister, that's something that should be conducted by the members of Parliament themselves, even if it then has to be ratified at the next election or something like that. I think that's important because you cannot have what we did have, someone being elected by the members in the country over the heads of the MPs who thought, no, this is the wrong person.
Well, let's turn then to Rishi Sunak, who you thought was the right person. Rishi Sunak, in a word.
I'm going to use another phrase, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'll let you off. The smartest man in the room.
That's interesting. What do you mean by that?
I think in any situation, very intelligent, great life experience, both in terms of, his upbringing, but also his commercial and business experience. Great interpersonal skills, brilliant ability to do detail and big picture, that's unusual, and to focus on the key issues. So the guy is just smart.
Can he win?
Yes.
You actually think he could win?
He can win. I'm not saying we are going to win, but he most certainly can win. And the reason we can win is because two things will be uppermost in most people's mind. Most people out there are not thinking about the election right now. It will be the economy and leadership. And the economy, I hope, by the autumn of next year will be doing quite well. And people will forget some of the problems we've had. I hope inflation will be well under control, and the interest rates and mortgage rates, I hope, will dipped a little. And leadership. And I'm sorry, but most people who have any idea how life works, if you had a choice between, if you had to recruit Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer, I think Keir's a lovely man, I do. But, come on, there isn't much of a contest, in my opinion. Rishi is outstanding. How
much of a problem will it be that while he's trying to fight Keir Starmer, he's also trying to fight Boris Johnson and Nadine Dorries and
what I say to people is that I think left to his own devices, Rishi Sunak can win us the next election. Unfortunately, he's not being left to his own devices. We have got some parliamentary colleagues and others who are just messing it up for us. If they continue like that, then it might not be such a great outcome. If they can be persuaded to just go quietly into that still night, then all bets are off. We could easily come home ahead.
So your message to Boris Johnson and Nadine?
You've had a good run. We appreciate your talents, but please now go and do something else.
Very good, very good. Right, I want to do some exit interview, sort of quick fire questions. Do you think you're equipped? Do you think we equipped you properly to handle your job? It's such a weird thing being an MP. Do you think you had the right skills to do it?
Well, that's a slightly different question. Did you equip me to do it? Absolutely not. And there's no training whatsoever. Yeah. Did I have the right skills to do it? I think my legal background helps, and the fact that I was a councillor for 5 or 6 years, that helps too. Because politics is unlike anything else and takes a lot of learning, and I think local government experience is quite handy. But even today, I would say that incoming members of Parliament or potential members of Parliament are not receiving any kind of on-the-job training, and maybe that needs to change. But the way that I think we've always looked at this is, when you are elected to Parliament, you're almost like a small business. You're a standalone person. You make your own decisions, you employ your own staff, and so on. And it would be I think it would be counterproductive if the state took over and taught and led and put you in the straitjacket. So maybe it's never going to change. I think the system we have in our party for selecting people, generally speaking, works quite well. And you do get people who've got something about them. Obviously, I am an exception, who get elected to Parliament and make a contribution.
Your best moment or proudest moments in the job?
I mean, the thing I enjoy most is helping people in the constituency, as you might expect me to say that. But actually, ironically, for a committed Christian, the most important thing I've ever done for the constituency, and the thing I am very proud of, is that when I was first elected, the Trident refit work, refitting the Trident submarine, was destined for Rosyth. And I can remember many tussles with Gordon Brown before he was terribly famous over that. And
that was his part of the work.
Rosyth was his, and they'd actually dug the hole in the ground where this thing was going to be maintained. And in came Devonport with a better offer, and I lobbied every member of the cabinet, made speeches with just relentless campaigning, and in the end the government said, no, okay, it can go to Devonport, the Trident thing, and it's worth millions and millions of pounds to the local economy for 20 odd years. This was 1993, so I mean that's 30 years ago. And thousands and thousands of jobs, so great. And unfortunately that was my first year and I've done nothing since.
Does beating Gordon Brown to that make it all the sweeter?
That was nice, and in fact I went to one of his press conferences in my first sort of 6 months or so at Westminster. I didn't quite know what the form was, and I was asking him questions. So there was another MP asking him questions, and he said, well, hang on a minute, who are you? Which paper are you with? I am the member for Plymouth Sutton, as I was then, and you know, it's got to come to Plymouth. Get out of my press conference.
Excellent. So that's your proudest moment. Your biggest regret or your worst moment?
I haven't enjoyed being away from my family. And that's even after 30 odd years. You know, when you marry someone because you're in love with them, and then you say, well, I'll see you on Friday. So that's been a tough gig, but we've got into a rhythm now, and we're looking forward to retirement together, hopefully. You know, there's been some very difficult decisions to make over the years, I suppose. I didn't enjoy being sacked by Duncan Smith, even though I knew it was coming. You know, and I think it's true that to say, and I'll put this to you in friendly phrasing that we've used throughout this interview. I handled it like a man of God, and I sulked for about 2 years. So that was a difficult time.
So did the sulking outlast Ian Duncan Smith as leader?
Do you know, he got a lot better when he was removed? Isn't that funny? And I don't carry grudges, honestly.
Yeah. And what about the toughest decision you've had to make? Is that where your conscience has clashed up against party?
I was about to resign as a PPS in the first Parliament because we cut education spending.
In, what is this, 92, 97?
94, 5, can't remember the details now. And then John Major called all his ministers together and all his PPSs together that night, and I had my resignation letter in my pocket, the resignation letter in my pocket, and he said, there's been something going down in Northern Ireland, tomorrow's going to be a really tough day for us, so I want this order to be on the side. I just went out the room, just tore it up, put it in the bin, and thought, I can't do that now, and I didn't resign over it, though I don't know if I made the right decision or not, but you know, then my schools had less money, so there are difficult decisions. But then any teacher out there, any librarian, anyone, even journalists have to make difficult decisions, Matt.
Yeah, we do. Often ours are the toughest, I always think.
I think that too. You should be paid an awful lot more.
Would you recommend this to someone else?
I most certainly would. I mean, the job has changed dramatically.
For the better?
I wouldn't say for the better, but that's because of my generation, I think. Bearing in mind when I was first elected, no internet, no emails, no smartphones, no technology, no social media. You know, newspapers,
Sounds lovely.
You turn the pages over, for goodness sake. But I have recommended it because the person who's been selected to succeed me as the Conservative candidate in South West Devon is a very good friend of mine. I've known her since she was born, actually. And she's a lovely local councillor. She's going to do a great job. And she's absolutely champing at the bit, and she loves all that sort of social media stuff, which I hate. So I think there is a place for granddads like me to quit the stage, because the job has changed. The essence of the job has not changed. You represent your constituents, you hold the government to account, but the mechanics of it are unrecognisable from the day I was first elected to Parliament. And it's fine, but I'm just not a digital native, and I'd be very happy to hand it over.
Is your son standing as well, isn't he?
My son's standing in a seat which we probably won't win, but he's very passionate about politics. I don't know where he's got that from, probably from his mother, and I can't stop him from doing it.
Did you try?
I just pushed back slightly to say, you know, are you really sure about this? Because it's a tough old gig. It's a tough gig. Yeah. But someone's got to do it. You can't have democracy without people being elected.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. What advice have you given him?
Well, I think time management is an issue. It's not. What I'm saying is, have a life. Don't just fight like mad for 2 or 3 years and do nothing else but politics. Have a proper, and he has got a proper life. He's got a partner and he's got a great job and so on. So he's got a proper life. No, he's doing really well. I'm very proud of him. I hope that if he doesn't make it this time, then in Devon and Cornwall there will be a lot more retirement seats the time after probably, and he's got plenty of opportunity, and I'll be very proud to see him up there.
Is there anything that we could do to make your job better?
When you say we, do you mean the media?
Well, maybe the media, maybe as a country, something that we could do to make being an MP a more enjoyable, appealing prospect?
I don't even think we should try. I don't, because, I think you've got to be pretty tough to be a Member of Parliament, and that's fine.
Yeah.
The media job is not to stroke us, but to probe us. And how can you probe people gently and kindly? You can't. You have to be ruthless and recognise that. And when the things go wrong, and I say to people, constituents come in and say, "Oh, you politicians," right? Checks and balances. We have got checks and balances in this country coming out of our ears. It was great. We've got. I mean, quite often I've said the media is so irresponsible, but I'm glad you're there because we need checks and balances. And one of the things we haven't talked about, I chaired something called Westminster Foundation for Democracy for about 5 years back along, and going around the country, around the world, talking to people about what is the essence of democracy. Yeah. There are very few things that you can say you must have these things, but an independent judiciary and a robust free media are absolutely essential. And no, we mustn't make it cushy for MPs. If you could look back at the old early Punch cartoons in the 19th, 18th, 17th century, we've always been lampooned. It's not going to change. Yeah. It's still a fantastic job. It's a noble calling, and it's a great opportunity to serve your country.
So last question then, Sir Gary Streeter. What will you do next?
Well, I'll be 69 at the next election. I have 5 grandchildren living locally. I do quite a lot of preaching in local churches. I probably will find one thing to do to carry on sort of public service, but I'm going to retire, Matt. I'm going to retire. Why wouldn't I?
What will that look like? Gardening, tennis, rock climbing? What are you even desperate to do, but you haven't been able to?
Spend more time with my wife. Yeah. Do a bit of pottering around together. Yeah. We have a few acres, which I like. Strangely, I'm a farmer's son, so I like doing things like fencing. Yeah. Putting up a fence to keep the horses in and that sort of stuff. I'm just going to enjoy being out on the land. I might even put my shorts on, just relax. I've been working pretty flat out since I was, 21? Yeah. And I was 60, I'll be 69 when I retire. Yeah. I think, it's been nice to have a few years of not doing too much.
House of Lords?
Definitely not. Defeats the object. I'm retiring, so my wife and I can have some golden years together. If I have to get in my car and go to Tiverton Parkway Station every single week, what's the point of that?
Well, Gary Streeter, we met a long time ago when I first joined the West Body News, and you were always very kind and helpful then. So I wish you the very best in your retirement. So Gary Streeter, thank you for joining us on your exit interview.
Thank you, Matt.